owe you another thank you because, as I said before, I'm not used to preparing so much in advance. And it's not even Tisha B'Av, it's just Rosh Chodesh Av today. And I've been in the midst of the high holidays for the past week or two, thinking about these sessions. I grew up with a chazan in a small shul. There's Neve Shechter, which is JTS in Israel. That's where we used to daven for the holidays. And it was a small minyan with about 50 people. And there was a chazan there, wonderful. He had all of the kids. We had a choir. He later on became a great chazan, and for the past 30 years, he's been the chazan in Marble Arts Synagogue in London. So he just sent us a recording because they're not going to have services. He sent us a recording that they're sending out of all the services. And it was so amazing to go back to the melodies. So I've between Kol Nidre and Neila and Untitled Chapter for B'Rosh Hashanah Ikatevun, thanks to you for the past week and a half, and I really want to say thank you. It's very special. I want to go back to what we did 2 days ago as a short introduction to what we'll be doing today. I wanted to approach Yom Kippur and the whole high holiday experience as a communal experience and as a very personal experience. And on Monday, we were looking at Kol Nidre because we said we would tackle those two, the communal experience and the personal one, through two different filot. We looked at Kol Nidre, at the whole community coming together in order to dissolve our personal vows. And we spoke in great length about the power of community, about the ability of the people around us to help us move from phase to phase, to change, to do tshuva, to become better people. And we said how in life we bring people together for our bar bat mitzvah, for our wedding, for other significant things that we want to mark in life, and how all the people that love us and that know us, the fact that they're around us and that they see us making the change or the tradition enables it to really happen. It's not just an atmosphere, it really allows things to happen. And we try to look at that through Kol Nidre and through all coming together, and also to think about what kind of community we want to be. And how can we be a community that's also together and also sets people free to be different than the way we always knew them to be. So that was one way of looking at things. I also mentioned the community can freeze us in place, that the people around us, since they've known us for so many years, sometimes don't allow us to change. And if Yom Kippur is all about tshuva or being a different person, then our friends and community can be a problem. And Kol Nidre was about being that group of people that knows who we are, but wants to enable us to change. There's a wonderful story that I thought of bringing last time, but I didn't. It's from the Talmud. It's from Masechet Shabbat. We're about to approach it in the Daf Yomi, if any of you are following. It's on page, I think, 147. We're about 10 pages away. It's a story about Rabbi Elazar ben Arach. I don't know if you're familiar with the name, and if not, there's a very good reason. Rabbi Elazar ben Arach was one of the better known sages. Out of the 5 disciples of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, he was said to be the best. And when Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai mentions all his 5 students, he says that Rabbi Elazar ben Arach stands out. The interesting thing is, after saying that, Rabbi Elazar ben Arach disappears. We don't find him in the Talmud. All the other 4 out of the 5 become prominent figures, and we hear them throughout the Mishnah. It's Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua, very, very famous names. And Rabbi Elazar ben Arach disappears. The story I was thinking of sharing with you last time and I didn't bring is basically telling us where Rabbi Elazar ben Arach disappeared to. Turns out that he went to a place called Emmaus with hot springs in Israel, probably Hamad Gader, probably near the Kinneret. He left Yavne for a family vacation. You would say he went to Florida for a while. The thing is, he never came back to the Beit Midrash. He had a wonderful time. It was great there. And he stayed. And a year or two later, he comes back to the Beit Midrash, and the Talmud tells a very strange story about how he forgot all the Torah that he learned. He walks into the Beit Midrash. I always think of the picture in mind. He walks in, he has this Hawaiian t-shirt, and he's wearing flip-flops, and his hair has grown long, and all the other sages are looking, what happened to Rabbi Elazar ben Arach? And they call him to the Torah. They want him to read something. And it's very embarrassing. He can't even read the Hebrew. The Talmud says that instead of reading HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem, 3 words about the new month in Israel, the new month, he reads Hacheresh Haya Libam. If I had spelled it out here in Hebrew, you would see the words are very similar, but it's like an embarrassing moment. Rabbi Elazar ben Arach comes back and he can't even read the Hebrew. And then the Talmud says about how his fellow sages prayed for him and he remembered all the Torah again. It's a very interesting story. It's basically saying the first part of our shiur last on Monday, saying the community is there to keep you strong, to help you. And if you leave your friends, you're going to forget everything. But there's a very special writer. Her name is Emuna Elon. She has a great interpretation to this story. She turns it all upside down. She says maybe he came with his Hawaiian t-shirt and with his flip-flops, but he knew very well what he was reading. And he sees them smirking and snickering or smiling under their beards when he walks in and he looks different. And he knows what they're thinking about him. And they call him to the Torah. So she says that he purposely, instead of reading a Chodesh Hazeh Lachem, reads 3 other words, Acheresh Haya Libam. Basically telling his fellow sages that their heart has become deaf, that nothing is new in their world. It's a beautiful, beautiful interpretation. She's basically saying that Rabbi Elazar ben Arach is saying, listen, if you remain here in the Beit Midrash, your whole life, you're never going to learn anything new. And you have to leave once in a while. You have to learn new things. You have to let go of your friends and community, and you have to allow yourself to become a different person. And basically he's saying to them, I've grown, I've changed. Not only do I remember the Torah that I learned when I was here, I enabled myself and I allowed myself to learn new Torah. I see the questions coming up from the chat about the source of Emuna Elon. I'll send you the quote. It's an article she wrote in a paper a few years ago. And towards the end of the class, I'll put all the sources on a link here. And we'll put them up on the web. It's a beautiful story. And the story is in Daf Kuf Mem Zayin. I think it's 147b in Masechet Shabbat. And I'll send the Emuna Elon quote. But what I'm trying to say, or I was trying to say last time, is how community is a blessing and how it can also leave us stuck in one place without the ability to move. I want to look at the other extreme today. And I want to talk about a personal journey, and I'm even going to call it a very lonely journey. If I was talking about Kol Nidre as the communal service, I want to look at a bit of Avodat HaKohen HaGadol, the work of the holy priest on Yom Kippur. He enters Kodesh HaKodashim. He enters Kodesh HaKodashim alone. And nobody's there to help him. And nobody can even walk in. He's all by himself. When the Torah talks about Yom Kippur, that's the main thing the Torah talks about. Kohen HaGadol, all alone in Kodesh HaKodashim. Even if you think of the sources we brought last time, we mentioned Moshe. According to tradition, Moshe meets God on Yom Kippur, when God is finally willing to forgive the people of Israel for the sin of the golden calf. According to tradition, that's on Yom Kippur. And also there, Moshe is alone, all by himself, all alone with God. And I want to look a bit at the personal experience of Yom Kippur. I think it has a lot to do with the days we're going through now. It's interesting. On the one hand, we're so on our own. There was a time we were locked in our houses, and we didn't go to synagogue, and we didn't meet our neighbors, and we didn't see anybody else. We were all on our own. and it's a very powerful experience. On the other side, on the other hand, I think we've never been so together in the recent history that I can remember. We're together as a society, we're together as a world, and if I'm not careful, it affects so many other people. And if one nation isn't careful, it can affect the whole world. So we're all on our own, but we've never had such a strong sense of community. And it's interesting to think of these times now, but I want to go back to Yom Kippur in a second and think of the Yom Kippur experience as a personal experience in addition to what the communal experience I was talking about last time. Before I enter, and I'll go to the sources in a second. I want to mention one more thing. When Jennifer was saying my bio, or things that I've had the privilege of, or places I've had the privilege to be in. So besides being a community rabbi, which attached me very much to the community experience, I also do a lot of work with couples. I run seminars for couples, pre-married seminars, and for couples that have just gotten married. And I've been working for the past 15 years with couples. And I want to bring something from that world, which I think will have a lot to do with what we're talking about today. It's something I'm sure many of you are familiar with. It's called The 5 Languages of Love, a famous book by Gary Chapman, written in the early 1990s. And one of the nice things that he said, I'll say it first in the couple world, and then I'll think of us as a society and as a community. He said couples have different ways of telling each other they care, or 5 languages of love. And I can say, or I can use different languages to show affection. So he mentioned 5. I have all sorts of ways of remembering them in Hebrew, but in English it's words of affirmation. It's basically the language. I can say, you look beautiful today. I can say, I love you. I can say many other wonderful things. He talked about time, quality time. You can show affection just by spending time. I'll be talking about this as presence, as just being there. He spoke about giving gifts, showing that you care by giving something. He spoke about acts of service. So I can tell my wife that I love her. I can buy her a gift. Or I can say on Shabbos afternoon, listen, you can go rest and I'll be with the kids. And while she's resting, I can also finish clearing the table and wash all the dishes. I should do that once in a while. But so Gary Chapman says that's acts of service. That's doing something for somebody else. I'll say them in Hebrew in a second. And the last is physical touch. Those are 5 different ways of, so in Hebrew I say there's 4 mem and 1 nun. There's a milim, and there's matanot, and there's mechvot, that's the acts, and there's maga, which is the touching, and the nun is what I call the presence is nochechut. So those are the 5 things, and it's very interesting to talk about with couples, because it's interesting to think for yourself, what are the languages you express yourself in? Like when you want to say to somebody you care, how do you say that? Do you buy them something? Do you say something? Do you give them a nice comment? Do you just come and show up? That's presence. And it's also very interesting to think, how do we like to be told by others that they care about us? And the nice thing, or sometimes the tragic thing, is it's not always the same. Because couples can find out 5 years into the relationship that one of them is saying all the time that they care for the other, but because it's not the way that that person is used to be or wants to be cared for, they're not hearing it. So you can maybe want your significant other to make you a warm meal, because that's the way you feel loved. But for them, they're all in compliments or in giving a big hug. And it's very interesting for two people to say, I want to think for a second how I express love and how I'm willing to get love. That's all in the couple world. I'll put that on the side for a second. What I want to speak about is a community or a society. It's also very meaningful. How can we be with other people? How can we tell them we care? And whenever one language, this is another thing that Gary Chapman said, whenever we're lacking or one of the languages is missing, then we compensate with the others. So if we're not able to touch at the moment because somebody is away at a convention for a week, then we'll talk more on the phone or we'll use more languages. And we can buy presents if we're not able to do acts of giving or service. So we'll always be compensating. So it's very interesting, like today as a society, when we're lacking on certain languages, when like touch is out of the question, okay, and you're not giving all the people that you want hugs. So what are we using to compensate? Are we talking more? Are we writing more? Are we buying more presents? Are we going out of our way to do other things? And how does the society compensate for things that they're missing? So I'm going to be talking soon about loneliness and not being able to talk to somebody or be with them, or not being able to be present. And through the Mishnah in Masechet Yoma, Tractate Yoma, about Yom Kippur, I'm going to be looking at how we compensate. But before we get to the Kohen HaGadol, to the high priest, and to him being all alone on Yom Kippur, I want to start with going back to those ways of communication for a second. And I'll start with our parasha, with Parashat HaShavua, which is, we're beginning the book of Dvarim. Let me see if this works now. Okay. Can you all see? Yeah? Okay. So these are all the sources together. So the first 8 or 9 pages are what we studied on Monday. And I'm going to go all the way down to page, I think, on the numbered pages, it's page 8. Okay? And the title here is V'chiper ba'ado ve'al beito ve'ad kol ke'al Yisrael. This is what we'll be talking about. The high priest, when he walks into Kodesh HaKodashim, he brings a few sacrifices. One is only for him and his family. And the final verse that we're going to get to is, he atones for himself, for his household, and for the whole congregation of Israel. That's the journey we're going to try and do today. Think of when he's there for himself, when is he there for himself and his household, and when is he there for himself, for his household, and the whole congregation of Israel. But that's the title. Again, I want to go back to different forms of communication, and I want to start with the first few verses of the book that we're starting to read this Shabbat, and it's Deuteronomy, the book of Dvarim. And to think of, again, as a society, how we connect, how we communicate. So there's a few interesting things with the opening verses of Dvarim. First of all, the first verse is already very exciting. Ele advarim asher diber Moshe el kol Israel, or in English, these are the words that Moses addressed to all Israel on the other side of the Jordan, through the wilderness in the Arava near Suf, between Paran and Tofel, Lavan, Chatzerot, and Dizahav. And so they say what he said, they say where he said it, and in verse 2, they'll say when he said it. It is 11 days from Chorev to Kadesh Barnea, so it gives us the time, the place, and the content. When I say this verse is exciting, it's exciting because Moshe is speaking. Because we never knew Moshe can talk. And the whole book of Deuteronomy are 3 great speeches, all beautifully built, by somebody who in the beginning of his career said to God, I am not a man of words. Lo ish dvarim anochi. And when God wants to send him to the people of Israel, he says, or when he wants to send him to Pharaoh, he says, the people of Israel didn't even listen to me. Hen bnei Israel lo shamu elai. How can Pharaoh listen? Ve'ech yishma'eni paro v'ani aral sfatayim. I stutter. I can't even talk. And suddenly he's giving these three amazing speeches. And the first thing I wanted to say is, it's interesting because already in Shirat Hayam, already when they cross the Red Sea, then the verse say the following. The verses say, Vayaminu b'Hashem u'Moshe avdo. The people of Israel believed in Moshe and in God. And then it says, Az Yashir Moshe. Then Moshe started singing. And there's a beautiful commentary there that says, the reason Moshe couldn't talk, sorry about that. There was a bug that climbed into my shoe. Sorry for sharing that. Okay, need to clean the office better. Now I'm with you and I apologize. See, you'll remember this class forever. You might not remember the content in the Torah, but you'll remember there was a bug in my shoe. Anyway, slicha. What I was saying is, one of the beautiful commentaries on that is, Moshe couldn't speak because nobody was listening. And he was stuttering not because he had a problem, because there was nobody to listen on the other side. But then when it says, Vayaminu b'Hashem u'Moshe avdo, they believed in God and in Moshe, Az Yashir Moshe. Then he could sing. So the fact that Moshe can get up and say these three amazing speeches says something about the relationship between God, between Moshe and the people of Israel. They've built something over these years that Moshe has become an amazing speaker because they're amazing listeners. And communication always has two sides. Another nice thing about these verses is that these places, Arava, Suf, Paran, Tofel, Lavan, Chatzerot, Rashi says they don't exist. And if you look in the commentary, it's so interesting. Rashi will say, it's all hints of places. And when he says Suf, he's mentioning Yam Suf and the fact that they didn't want to cross the ocean. It's all, he's reminding them of their sins. He just doesn't want to say them out loud. He's being nice about it. So he's only using words. So I'll find. So Rashi says that all of them are different sins, and because he doesn't want to mention them, he's hinting at them. Now, that's very interesting because that says another thing about their relationship. Because when you become very close to somebody, it's enough to say a word and they know exactly what you're talking about. So he's reprimanding, is that a word in English? I hope it is. He's saying bad things to them, but he's saying it in a language of love. He's scolding them, but in a way that only lovers can scold each other. Because he's using one word to remind them of something. So I'm just trying to say that there's different ways of connecting. It can be in hinting. It can be in listening. And one of the nicest things, there's a beautiful Midrash. I'm growing this beard not just because I didn't shave for the shiur, because it's already Rosh Chodesh Av, and in 9 days it's Tisha B'Av. And one of the beautiful Midrashim says that the Churban, the destruction of the temple, had a lot to do with, it's like we've lost the language, we're not talking anymore. And the Haftarah, right after Tisha B'Av, it's called Shabbat Nakamu. And I see people here, there's a beautiful song called Nachamu Nachamu Ami. And there was a singing group called Pizmon. I don't know if any of you are familiar with it, but they have a beautiful tune for Nachamu Nachamu Ami. The Midrash I was saying says that right after Tisha B'Av, God wants to talk to the people of Israel. He says, Dabru alev Yerushalayim v'kiru eleh. Go tell the people of Israel that I've forgiven them. And he sends his angels to talk to the people of Israel. So the Midrash says that the people of Israel say, we don't want him to send the other people. The next Haftorah you read the next week is Aniyah So'ara Lo Nuchama. I don't want to listen. We're not being consoled. if he wants to talk to us, he should come in person. And then a few weeks later, we'll read Anochi Anochi U'Menachemchem. Okay, I'm willing to talk. In terms of communication, sometimes you can use words, but sometimes you need presence. You need somebody to come and be there with you, mamash. And when I'm going to talk now about the Kohen Gadol, I want to show how alone he is. And I want to look at different ways of how our sources say the people were actually with him, and how we can maybe be with people who are alone. And I also want to look at the experience of being on your own and how important that is for Yom Kippur, as opposed to the communal one that we were talking about on Monday. Okay, so those are all the things that we're going to do now with the Kohen Gadol. And I'm moving to source number 11 on page 10. And these are the verses in Vayikra, in Leviticus. And these verses talk about the Avodat Kohen Gadol, the work of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur inside the temple. These are, by the way, the verses that we read. This is the Torah reading for the morning of Yom Kippur. This is part of Musaf, the Musaf service. Besides reading it in the Torah, we recite this, or at least some shuls recite everything that he did on Yom Kippur. So this is like a very, very, very major part of Yom Kippur, and this is what I want to read through now. So the Lord spoke to Moses after the death of the two sons of Aaron who died when they drew too close to the presence of the Lord. And the Lord said to Moses, tell your brother Aaron that he is not to come at will into the shrine behind the curtain in front of the cover that is upon the ark, lest he die, for I appear in the cloud over the cover. Basically, God is saying, no more people can enter Kodesh HaKodeshim. The holiest person can enter the holiest place only on the holiest day of the year. Kohen Gadol, the holiest person, is allowed to enter the holiest place, Kodesh HaKodeshim, only in the holiest time of the year. And even then, there's all these restrictions. And from verse 3 and on, basically they're telling us what happens every Yom Kippur. Thus only shall Aaron enter the shrine with a bull of the herd for a sin and an offering of a ram, as a sin offering, and a ram for a burnt offering. He shall be dressed in sacred linen tunic with linen breeches. Then he shall wear, and he bathes his bath in water, and he takes sacrifices from the people of Israel, and he does everything that we're probably familiar with on Yom Kippur. He brings one sacrifice for him and for his family, and then he brings another sacrifice to atone not only for his sins, but for the sins of Israel and for the sins that were done inside the temple. And if I skip to verse 16, thus he shall purge the shrine of the uncleanliness and the transgression of the Israelites, whatever their sins, and he shall do the same for the tent of meeting. So he also atones for the tent itself, which abides with them in the midst of their uncleanliness. So it's like he's cleaning the people, he's cleaning the shul, and he's cleaning for all the people of Israel. And then it says the following, verse 17, when he goes to make expiation in the shrine, nobody else shall be in the tent of meeting until he comes out. Or in Hebrew, וכל אדם לא יהיה באוהל מועד בבואו לכפר בקודש עד צאתו. He's all by himself. I'm skipping here. And then it says, וכיפר בעדו ועל ביתו ועל כל קהל ישראל. Again, the English that I brought already in the title. He makes atonement or expiation for himself and his household and the whole congregation of Israel. And I want to look for a second at Kohen Gadol. He's inside. Nobody else is allowed to enter. Like families are saying today, that they might live an hour flight away from their relatives, but they feel like they're on the moon. Okay, I was talking to a close friend in Canada. And her parents, they live an hour flight away in New England. But she can't visit them. And it's so close, and it's so far. And I think of the Kohen Gadol. He's in Kodesh HaKodashim. No matter what happens, nobody can enter. He's all on his own. He has nobody to ask. He's there to atone for his sins, for his family's sins, for the people of Israel. But he's as alone as you can be. There was a movie called Everest. I don't know if you've watched it. And about a mountain climber stranded on the mountain. And there's a blizzard. And he realizes he's stuck there. And nobody can come help him. And he's talking on the phone on the last conversation to his family. And it's a terrible moment in the movie. And just to think about how you can be very, very close, but the fact that nobody can be there with you is a very, very harsh and strong sense of loneliness. And I want to look at it for a second in a positive view. Because when I said there's a personal journey of Yom Kippur, not just a communal journey, different thinkers, philosophers, have spoken a lot about the experience of loneliness. I think maybe one who's talked about it, who wrote about it more than anybody else in our world is Rav Soloveitchik. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with the lonely man of faith. And he starts by saying, I remember the Hebrew version. He says, Ani boded. Like those are the two words he starts with. I'm lonely. Ani boded. So many of people who study Rav Soloveitchik will speak also about his biography, because he was very lonely. That's how he grew up. Because he went to school, there was a melamed there, but when his mother found out that it's a Chabadnik, then his grandfather pulled him out of school, and he studied at home. He studied with his father. And from a very young age, Rav Soloveitchik grows up alone at home. So many will point to the biography, but I think if people read his philosophy, it's much more than that. He speaks about loneliness or a personal journey. That's his connection to God. That's his strongest moment. There's in the beginning of the book, he relates to, in 1960, he was diagnosed with cancer. And he tells nobody, and he's giving, I think, a hesped, a eulogy. It's not a hesped, but it's a azkara for his uncle. And he's speaking at Yeshiva University. And there's hundreds, I think he says thousands of people in the room. But he says he's all on his own. Nobody knows what he's going through. Nobody can help him. And he's all on his own. But he speaks about it not as something that has to do with depression. He speaks about the experience of facing God, of not being able to run away to anywhere, and to be fully present in the moment. And so many people have written about how this can how it can be a meaningful experience. I'll bring one more source that I didn't find, not the Hebrew, not the English, so it's not on your source sheet, but it's a beautiful piece of Torah by the Degel Machane Ephraim. The Degel Machane Ephraim is Rabbi Ephraim Misedlikov. He's the grandson of the Baal Shem Tov. And it's a very special book, Degel Machane Ephraim, because since the Baal Shem Tov didn't write, we have very little original Torah of the Baal Shem Tov. A lot of it appears in the Degel Machane Ephraim. And one of the verses he talks about there is a verse from Tehillim, where King David says, I'm all alone, please share your secrets with me. He's talking to God. He says, it's in chapter 119, Ger anochi ba'aretz, al taster mimeni mitzvotecha. I'm a stranger in this land, teach me your mitzvahs. And the Deged Machane Ephraim says, what's the relationship between saying the first part of the sentence, I'm a stranger in this land, and the second part, please share your mitzvahs with me. So he says that King David is saying to God the following, listen, I don't belong here. I have nobody I can talk to. I'm a stranger. But then King David turns to God and says, now that I think of it, you're kind of a stranger here too. You have nobody you can really talk to either. So listen, if we're both strangers, you can talk to me. Tell me your mitzvahs. And he says that strangers connect to each other. That loneliness is something that opens your heart. A personal journey is something that allows you to open up because you have nothing you can hold on to. And personal journeys are very, very strong in that sense. I'll give two more short examples. And I teach at a place called Beit. It's in Jerusalem and it's many other places in Israel. It's a big organization for young Israelis from all different walks of Jewish life. And the founder of the place that many of you might have heard, he teaches and speaks at Hartman a lot. His name is Micha Goodman, Dr. Micha Goodman. And we've had this ongoing dispute for years of how to treat people when they come for their first day to study. It's an overnight program. And Micha has this whole theory. I'll say it very simply. Micha says, let's not be nice to them, and I say we should be nice to them. I know that doesn't sound good on Micha's part, so I'll try and say a few more words to make his case. When they all come, they have their big bags. It's a sleepover program. And Micha says we shouldn't give them rooms. They come and we don't give them rooms. And all their bags are outside till the late afternoon. He says, put your bags here and walk into the Beit Midrash. And I want to say, for the sake of his argument, he says that the moment somebody has their room and their bed, they're not open to listening. They have something they can hold on to. And the personal experience of not holding on to anybody else, not having anybody hold your hand. The personal journey of Yom Kippur, I think it's very, very meaningful. The not being able to hold on and to be out there on your own. Another story that I'm sorry that these aren't all in the sources, but I'll just show you like one more over here. I'm moving for a second just to a different page. Did you all move with me? You see this page? No? You're still on the other one? I need to stop sharing and move back. I apologize. Here, I get a chance to see everybody's faces for a second. Shalom. Now I'm going to share just one more source with you. I'm sure that many of you are familiar with it. It's from the Talmud and from Masechet Avodah Zarah, from Tractate Avodah Zarah, page 17a. And it's a story about Rabbi Elazar ben Dordai. I'm not going to go into the story in depth because I'm sure many of you are familiar and we could spend an hour and a half just on this story. But he's a big, big sinner. I'll read the first line. They said about Rabbi Elazar ben Dordaya, he did not leave a single prostitute in the world that he had not slept with. Okay? He's a big, big sinner. Did I share this with you? I didn't yet. I just moved to it. I'm sorry. I'm reading as if you're seeing what I apologize. Now you see what I'm talking about? Yeah? The matter is dependent on me, only on me. So this story, if you're familiar with, again, I'm reading, they said of Rabbi Elazar ben Dordaya, I'm here. He did not leave a single prostitute in the world that he had not slept with. But then suddenly, because of something that went on in the conversation between him and a certain prostitute that he went to, he decides to do tshuva. He's going to change. He's going to become a good person. And there's a famous song, Go Sinner Man, Where Are You Going to Run To? I don't know if you're familiar with it. And the sinner man runs to all the people. So he goes and he sits between the hills and he begs for mercy from the hills and from the moon and from the sun. And nobody wants to help him. And only in the end of this story, when nobody wants to help him, he said, the matter is only dependent on me. And then he sits there and he puts his head between his knees and he cries. It's like becoming a baby again. It's as if he's in the womb. And he cries and he dies at the end of the story. And I'll send this also with all the sources that I haven't, but again, it's Masechet Avodah Zarah, Tractate Avodah Zarah, 17a. And that moment of saying, it's all about me now, and it depends on me, is a very, very strong moment. I'm going to stop sharing this and I'm going to go back to our sources. But I want to speak again on behalf or in benefit or in the sake of the personal journey of Yom Kippur. Because we said so much about being part of a community and allowing them to carry us through. Not only them as people, it's everything we know. It's our place in shul, it's the melodies, it's the chazan, it's a rabbi, it's everything we know. That helps us and it carries us through. And that's what makes our Yom Kippur Yom Kippur. But today I just wanted to point out how important and how meaningful it is that the Torah will take us to V'chol Adam lo yeh be'ohel moed. You're all on your own. Every one of us is a Kohen Gadol walking into Kodesh HaKodashim with nobody else there to help him. In many ways, that's what we're supposed to feel in Yom Kippur. We're the Kohen Gadol. We've walked in, and nobody is there with us. And I already see the time advancing. So I just want to point out like some of the sources. Midrash Rabbah on source number 12, it's amazing that the sages will say nobody was there with him. So they want to point out how alone he was. So the first one, Rabbi Pinchas and Rabbi Chilkiah say, what does it mean, Kol Adam lo yeh be'ohel moed? Not only no people were there, but there were no even angels. The angels couldn't enter Kodesh HaKodashim. He was all on his own. And then Rabbi Abau says, wait a second, but he was there. How can you say there was nobody there? And then he'll say, you know what, even he wasn't there. He's only there on behalf of the other people. It's just their way of saying how alone he was. And again, I just wanted to speak about the experience. You only take responsibility when you're there on your own. I'll share one last story, and I'm going to the Mishnayot, to the rest of the sources. When I have twin daughters, they're 17 years old. And one of my greatest Yom Kippur moments with them, thinking of Yom Kippur and tshuva and sinning and repenting, was almost 12 years ago. They were 5. We were traveling on Kvish 6. I don't know if you've ever traveled it in Israel. For us, it's a highway. It's our biggest highway. You can travel for 20 minutes. And so I was traveling up north, and I told my wife she had a day off. I went to visit friends, and I took them with me. And we were driving. It was a 2-hour drive all the way up north. And the truth is, they weren't really behaving. They were fighting the whole way and screaming at each other, and it was very difficult. I'm sure none of your kids ever did this, but some kids fight in the back seat. So at a certain point, I couldn't take it. I went into a gas station, and I had to buy myself a cup of coffee. And I walk in, and I'm stepping out of the car. They say, Abba, can you buy us an ice cream? And I said, no, I'm not buying you any ice cream. So they look at me with their cute faces and say, why, you want ice cream? And I said, no, you didn't behave, and I'm not going to buy you ice cream. And I walked into the store, and I always give in the end, but I held on to myself. I bought myself a cup of coffee, no ice cream, and I walked out to the car. Get into the car, they're in total shock. I think it was the first time I actually stood to my word. They're stuck to my word. And they started, there, where's the ice cream? And they started crying. And I turned the car on and I start driving because I know if I stay there, I'm going to buy them ice cream. So there was crying in the car and everything. And they also said, oh, and you bought yourself coffee, but for us, you didn't buy anything. And I was just stuck to the same line. Yeah, you didn't behave, so I can't buy you ice cream. And then one of them, I'm not going to mention names, but she wants to be a lawyer. And she was already good at it at the age of 5. This is what she wants to do in the army now. So she said, okay, Abba, but we did tshuva. And I look at this 5-year-old and I say, what did you say? She says, chazarnu b'tshuva. We did tshuva. And for a few seconds, I didn't know what to say. And I said, what do you mean? She said, we did something wrong and now we did tshuva, so you need to buy us ice cream. So I was also very proud of her. But then I went back to Maimonides, the Rambam, and I explained, there's 4 different parts of tshuva, and you have to do this and this and this. And I was very pleased with myself because I won the argument and I showed how she hadn't gone through all 4, so they didn't do tshuva. So after a few minutes of silence, she says, okay, Abba, but it's your fault. And I say, what do you mean it's my fault? She says, it's your fault that we weren't behaving. I said, it's not my fault, you weren't behaving. She says, no, you're the one that decided to marry Ima. You had us as children. You brought us up. If we behave this way, it's your fault. So I didn't really know what to say. I just remember asking, when you do good things, is that me also? And she said, no, when we do good things, that's us. But if we did this, it's your fault. And I don't remember how the conversation ended. I think I bought them ice cream on the way back. But it lasted for a while. But there was a realization also on her side of taking responsibility. This is us. Good things is us. But maybe if we didn't behave nicely, it's us. And when you let go of everything and everybody around you, and there's nothing to hold on to, it can become a very, very meaningful moment in Yom Kippur. What I do want to show, and I'll have to do this shortly, is the Kohen HaGadol really wasn't alone. And when people are very on their own, we have lots of interesting ways to be with them. When Kohen Gadol, for instance, walks into Kodesh HaKodashim, he's wearing something. He's wearing this coat. And in chapter 28 in the book of Exodus, it says something about this coat. It says, on its hem, I'm in verse 33 over here. On its hem, make pomegranates of blue, purple, and crimson yards all around them, with bells of gold between them and all around. And I'm sure many of you are familiar. Why does he need these bells? Because he wears it when he goes into Kodesh HaKodashim. And if something happens, we're going to know that something happened to him. So in verse 35, it says, Aaron shall wear it while officiating, so that the sound of it is heard when he comes into the sanctuary before the Lord, and when he goes out, so he may not die. How does that help him? If he dies, what will happen? How do the pomegranates or the bells help him for not dying? But it says he's not alone. If he were there all alone, he might die. But the fact that somebody out there is listening, then he's not really alone. Nobody can see him. Nobody can enter. Nobody can talk to him. But the fact that somebody is listening, can hear him, he's not on his own. But the Mishnah doesn't stop with that. They show so many ways of this person not being alone. There's 2 people, by the way, that I want to talk about. Both of them are very much on their own. One is the high priest, and the other is a certain person who was chosen to take the other sacrifice into the desert. Both go on very personal journeys, but both of them, according to the Mishnah, are not alone. So I'll read quickly through a few of the Mishnayot from Yoma. The first Mishnah says that 7 days before Yom Kippur, they took him away from his house and they put him in a little chamber. in the temple. And they also said they nominated another high priest just in case he dies. But besides nominating another high priest, they also had him marry another wife, which, by the way, Kohen Gadol was not allowed to do. But they have another wife just in case. Why does he need another wife just in case? Because, I'm reading now in the English, they even prepare another wife for him in case his wife should die, as it says, and he shall make atonement for himself and for his house. When he's in there, he needs to know that there's somebody out there that really cares for him and it's waiting for him to come home. He needs to be praying for somebody else. By the way, this appears in halakha for chazanim, that according to many traditions in halakha, they need to have a family and people who are very close and care for them. And Kohen Gadol needs to be married. So somebody who's listening outside, you're not alone. If somebody's waiting for you to come home, or if you're caring for somebody who's out there, you're not alone. I'll bring a few more examples of not being alone. The other person that I said who walks alone is the one taking the sacrifice out to the desert. So there's a ramp that he walks from the temple. Everybody wants him to go very quickly because when he throws the sacrifice off the mountain, the sins are all atoned for. So they made him a ramp because people were pulling at his hair, shouting, "Take it and go out, take it and go out." And it says that there were 10 booths from Jerusalem to the Tzuk. And the important people of Jerusalem used to go out with him to the first booth. So he's not alone. Everybody's walking with him. But look at what happens in the next booths. Every booth he gets to, remember this is a fast day. So the people at the booth point to him and say, "Here, there's food and water here, if you want it." Now he never ate it. The Talmud will say he never ate it, but it was there. It's so interesting to think of food and drink on Yom Kippur. What are the minutes that we miss food the most? When are you the hungriest on Yom Kippur? About 10 minutes into the fast. You go for Kol Nidre, you just had the biggest meal of your life, probably drank a whole gallon of water, and you're thirsty and you're hungry. Why? Because there's no food or drink. You can't eat and drink now. And with this person, it's the opposite. They're saying to him, "Here, there's food and water here." Now the Talmud will say he never ate it or drank it, but he wasn't thirsty or hungry because there was food and water. All they had to do was offer him. And it says, and they went with him from one booth to booth, okay? So he's accompanied by the sense of food and drink. And he's also accompanied from booth to booth with people, except for the last one. They would not go with him to the tzuk, to the cliff, but rather they would stand from afar, but they would see what he's doing. There's so many ways to be with a person. We have also 4-year-old twins, and the 4-year-olds, when they go to Gan, now with the COVID, we're not allowed to go into the Gan. Now, so we stop at the gate, and we can't walk in with them. But they have me stand by the gate till they walk into the Gan. And the idea of just standing from afar, but seeing what he's doing. All these Mishnayot from Yoma show that the Kohen HaGadol or this person, it's as if they're all on their own, but they're not. They're not because somebody's listening. And I brought the poem down here. For whom the bell tolls, right? We'll get to this poem in a second, to No Man is an Island. But once the bell tolls and somebody's listening, you're not on your own. And if somebody cares for you, you're not on your own because they're waiting for you to come home. And if somebody is watching you or is offering you food and drink, then you're fine. You're not thirsty just because they're there to offer, even though you don't need it. Or if somebody's looking from afar, then you're not on your own. It's so interesting because the last moment of Yom Kippur, just look at these sources here. The last moment of Yom Kippur, this is the last Mishnah almost. When he comes home, they would walk him, they would accompany him to the house. When we say this in the prayers in Musaf, they say the streets were so crowded, he only got there after midnight. And I can think of this high priest, he's surrounded by people, but he's alone. He wants to go home to his wife and family. So in so many instances, he was alone, but not alone. And now he's crowded around by people, but he's all alone. He wants to get home. And I just want to go to this last Mishnah that we quoted now and the idea of going home. I know it's already 10 o'clock. I'm going to stop for questions in a second. Time flies. Slicha. But the last sources that I brought were about the fact that we're really never alone. And I want to talk about them for a second with Yom Kippur, or with this specific Yom Kippur coming up. But I want to pause for a second because it's already 10 o'clock. I'll try and look at the chat for a second. And Jen, if you've seen anything that you want to point out, I'll stop sharing for a minute. I'll see faces. And if people want to voice a question, or I'll try and read through.
The one question I saw is there a difference between boded and levad? Yeah. That was asked earlier. And otherwise, there's been some really beautiful comments in the chat and ways that people are relating and sharing similar ideas. So thank you, everyone.
So, קודם כל, thank you, mamash. And it's true, there's a difference in Hebrew between boded and levad, and also between alone and lonely. And the whole idea of the last two things that I had wanted to bring as sources show that there's a big difference between being alone and lonely, because like God's Soloveitchik that I was mentioning, alone for him is mamash not lonely, or his loneliness connects him to God in a very, very strong way, or opens him up to many, many other things. The examples I was trying to bring now is that even you can be in your room, or you can be distant from many people, but not being alone, with all the ways that we have to connect, with caring, and with thinking, and with people who are going to ask us, just at the end of the day, how was your Yom Kippur? And the fact that somebody's going to ask you, then you're already with somebody throughout the day. My parents have this thing when we were kids growing up. We had to say two good things at the table at dinner. It's a wonderful habit. But throughout the day, I was looking for good things that were happening, because I knew that in the evening I had to say two good things. One was always, it's a great dinner, so you only had to think of one. So that was always one. But still one, so if somebody's going to ask you after Yom Kippur, how was your Yom Kippur? That person is with you all your time. You know you're going to have that conversation. So even if you're not on the phone with them on Yom Kippur, you're there. If we're not going to all be together in Shul Yom Kippur, but we're going to have a session, the people are going to meet after Yom Kippur and share their experiences. So they're there with us. We have many ways. I said 5 languages of love. I think we have many more than 5 languages. So many ways of connecting. And I wanted specifically today to focus on the levad as something, on the aloneness, not the loneliness, on the aloneness as an opportunity. I think Soloveitchik brings it as an opportunity. The Degen Machane Ephraim, the grandson of the Baal Shem Tov, shows how it's an opportunity to open up. Micha says aloneness is something you can use to open up and to connect. And all those places, all our resting places, are sometimes problematic. And I wanted to talk about my daughters, Olehadil, Rabbi Elazar ben Dordaya, on taking responsibility or facing things only when the community is not there, and only when we have nothing else to rest on. And I was thinking of all the things that give us a sense of security. Really, it could be the melodies, and it can be our seat at shul, and it can be the people we meet every year. It can be so many things. And just to look for 1 second, I'm not going to romanticize it, but just to look for a second on the fact that there are things we can gain from not having all those things to rest on. I think can be meaningful. And I think every year, not just this one, Yom Kippur for every one of us moves between something very, very communal and something very personal. And I just wanted to travel these past 2 sessions between them and think of the benefits of the community and the benefits of the personal journey, and allow us to be part of both those journeys and to benefit as much as we can from both of them. So I was just going to share one personal thought in a second, but I do want to open up if somebody wanted to voice a question or a remark or a thought, and then I'll just maybe close with one more thing.
Are we allowed to talk not in the chat?
You're allowed to talk, yeah.
Well, one thought I have is, maybe I'm being too whatever, but isn't God always with us?
Definitely. Never alone. Never, never alone. When I was 7 years old, my parents went back for a sabbatical to California. So we joined Chabad. That was the youth group. I'm part of Army of Hashem. And then there was the song, Hashem is here, Hashem is there, Hashem is truly everywhere. And I really think it's something that many people happily feel. A very strong presence of not being alone. I think it's true every day, and it's definitely true on Yom Kippur. Janice, I'll just share with you one story about a source that I brought. There's a special prayer that the high priest would say in Kodesh HaKodashim. It's on source number 18. I'll share it here for a second. 1 second. Okay, we didn't get to all of the sources, but I'll just do this one. So he goes in and he says a short prayer. I learned this prayer, by the way. I was in Jerusalem. It was a nice day where I live, which is out in the desert. But I went in with shorts and sandals to Jerusalem, and it turned out to be a very rainy day in Jerusalem. I ran into a building in the rain, and I was hiding from the rain in the entrance to the building, and suddenly I hear somebody breathing next to me. So I had all this fog on my glasses, so I lift them and I see this old guy standing next to me with a big beard. I didn't know at the time that it was Elijah the prophet. I just thought it was a regular person. And we start talking, and he talks about the rain, and we talk about Torah, and he says, you know what the Kohen Gadol davens when he goes into Kodesh HaKodashim? That was the question he asked me. And I said no, because I wasn't sure. And he said, you know, he davens that if somebody is stuck outside in the rain and they pray for the rain to stop, then the rain shouldn't stop. Because the Kohen HaGadol is there on behalf of all the people of Israel. And he says, I don't want personal prayers that don't take into account all the other people to be accepted. I just wanted to relate to this earlier. I missed the whole context, but the idea was that loneliness or aloneness doesn't lead to not caring for the other people. Kohen Gadol goes in all on his own, but he's all on his own, and he's very much with the present, not only of God, but he brings in with him the other people, caring for the other people, thinking for the other people. And so it's mamash not an experience of loneliness. I want to say one last thing, and just to thank you all for being here. And I'll stop sharing for a second. I'll just share a story of a very special lady in our shul, passed away some years ago. And she was known in shul for two things, on Yom Kippur especially. Somebody I was very close with. One is she walked around with what we call tabak le'aracha, something that you smell, the very strong smell. You do that on Yom Kippur in your shuls?
Yes.
So some of you are familiar with it. It helps. It really makes you strong. It has this very, very strong smell. And there's a beautiful Hasidic Midrash that we smell things on Yom Kippur. First of all, you say a bracha. You say, Baruch atah Hashem melech haolam borei minei v'samim, because you need to reach 100 brachot every day, and on Yom Kippur we're lacking a lot because we don't eat, and we don't drink, and we don't. But besides, the Hasidic Midrash will say that of all of our senses, the sense of smell is the only one that didn't sin, never sinned. If you go back to the sin of Gan Eden, then they're talking, they listen to the snake, they listen to each other, they taste the apple, if it was an apple, and they feel the tree, and they see the tree. The only sense that didn't participate in the sin was the sense of smell. And they say that when everything's gone wrong, just go back to the last place where it worked and start building from there. And smell goes with memory. And then thinking of this Yom Kippur, and I'm saying, it might not be the Yom Kippur. And like for me, I'm going back to many other meaningful Yom Kippurim that I had. And I know I'll be using them and taking them out of the boidem of memory and building on them. And that's one thing. The other thing that this wonderful lady was known for is before Ne'ilah, she would walk around and give everybody candies. Now I want you to adopt this. This is a beautiful minhag. It goes back to Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Mibardichev. Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Mibardichev, those of you who might know, he was the one who always had something good to say about the people of Israel. He was known to be the one that could always convince God that we're doing good. And in his shul, before Ne'ilah, he would go to the Chazan, and they would take a big plate of food on a platter with lots of good food and drink, and he would place this little table in front of the Chazan before Ne'ilah, and to the rest of the people in shul, they would just give a nice piece of cake. And then he went up to the Duchan where he would give his Divrei Torah, his sermons, and he banged on the Duchan, and he turns his face to the Kadosh Baruch Hu and he says, listen, God, these people have been fasting all day. They're very hungry and they're very thirsty. They all have food. The only reason they're not eating is because they love you so much. Are you not going to forgive them? And they held on to these pieces of cake till the end of Ne'ilah, and then they ate all the food. So we give out candies, and you're supposed to hold on to them. We now give them out after Ne'ilah because a lot of people didn't understand the concept. But I love the idea of not only relying on our past, because what happens when you're holding on to a candy? You're not hungry anymore. You know that in 10 minutes, you're going to be eating. And there's something very strong on just looking ahead a bit also into the future and saying, Sada, in 10 minutes, next year, Yom Kippur is going to look different. We're going to go back to shul with all our favorite melodies and with a chazan and with our friends. And It's anticipation, somebody writes. Thank you, Elisheva. So both these things, and I want to go back to this person and thinking of how she maybe had something very important to tell us with smelling things she gave us, with chocolates or candies that she would give out. And I'm going back to her on this Yom Kippur and then the Yom Kippur that we're facing. So besides just saying thank you for being here, I wanted to hand each of you something to smell. And I'm not there personally, but if you could all go buy some good candy on behalf of me, Sedel, if you ever come visit to Israel and you can come and ask me for the 50 cents it costs, buy yourself something good, take it to shul, hold on to it at Neila. If you want to spend a bit more, and give it to your friends and tell them to hold on. And we'll think of all the great Yom Kippur we had and the great Yom Kippur we'll have and the very special and different Yom Kippur that we'll have with our personal journey this year that I hope for all of us can be very, very meaningful. So, toda rabba mamash.